Hello, and welcome all to Movie Hunter, the show that tracks down the quality of all sorts of movies. My name is Hunter, and today in the 21st episode, our target is 1951's Alice in Wonderland, produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios and distributed by RKO Radio Pictures. Alice in Wonderland, not to be confused with the other 27 films and TV shows of similar or identical names, is a 1951 animated Disney movie based on the two books by Lewis Carroll called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. The film was initially intended to be Walt Disney's first film before deciding to instead adapt Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. With this information, plus the information that Snow White released in 1937, and this film didn't release until 1951, there was obviously much troubled production behind the scenes. The story is a pretty long one, but in short, Walt Disney's growing disinterest in the film, combined with financial troubles, plus various changes on how the film would play out, led to the film's delayed release. The film released on July 28, 1951, becoming Walt Disney Animation Studios' 13th film after 1950's Cinderella and before 1953's Peter Pan. The film was directed by Ben Sharpsteen, Clyde Jerome, Wilfred Jackson, and Hamilton Luske, and produced by Walt Disney. The story was by Winston Hibler, Ted Sears, Bill Peet, Erdman Penner, Joe Rinaldi, Milt Banta, Bill Cortell, Dick Kelsey, Joe Grant, Dick Humer, Del Cornell, Tom Oreb, and John Walbridge. The editor was Lloyd L. Richardson, and the music was by Oliver Wallace. The directing animators were Mark Davis, Milt Kahl, Eric Larson, Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, Ward Kimball, John Lousenberry, Wolfgang Reitherman, Les Clark, and Norm Ferguson. The cast includes Catherine Beaumont, Ed Wynn, Jerry Colonna, Jimmy McDonald, Richard Haid, Sterling Holloway, J. Pat O'Malley, Bill Thompson, and Verna Felton. The film made $2.5 million on a budget of $3 million, rendering the film a box office flop. On top of that, the film received mostly negative or mixed reviews and was nominated for 2 awards, of which it didn't win any of. However, the film would gain fans later on and was re-released in 1974, making $3.5 million. The film became one of Disney's most well-known classics, giving way to theme park rides, video game cameos, and more. Alice in Wonderland has been adapted many times before and after this film, but perhaps most relevant to this conversation is the 2 live-action films produced by Disney in 2010 and 2016. The film opens with Alice studying schoolwork, though not much with focus or care. After dozing off for a nap, Alice finds a white rabbit wearing clothes and a pocket watch, who she follows down a rabbit hole. Upon solving a puzzle to get through a door with a talking doorknob, she finds herself in Wonderland, a place of talking animals with clothes. She eventually meets the twins Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who tell a tale of a walrus and a carpenter. She then comes across the White Rabbit's house, who is urgent to get somewhere, claiming to be very late. She meets some talking flowers and then a giant caterpillar, who ends the conversation upon turning into a butterfly. Upon wandering into a forest, she meets the Cheshire Cat, who disappears and flies around at will, who advises her to meet the Mad Hatter. She gets to the Mad Hatter's house, where he is hosting a tea party with the March Hare and Dormouse, celebrating their unbirthday, which is to say a day which isn't their birthday. The White Rabbit shows up again, and Alice follows, only to get lost and have the Cheshire Cat lead her to the hedges of the Queen of Hearts. She meets up with some of her subjects, specifically the Ace 1 and 2 of Hearts, who are desperate to not have the Queen realize their mistake of ordering white roses as opposed to red ones. The Queen of Hearts shows up and orders that the cards' heads be chopped off. The Queen then plays a rigged game with Alice, but upon the Cheshire Cat pulling a prank on the Queen and her falsely accusing Alice, she is given a court trial per the King of Hearts' suggestion. The trial is just as biased as the game, as the various characters seen throughout Wonderland give an unhelpful testimony. Alice runs after being sentenced to an execution and is pursued by the inhabitants of Wonderland, and Alice runs right back to the door with a talking doorknob and discovers that she is simply dreaming everything and is able to wake herself up. After finding herself back in the real world, she joins her sister for some tea. Firstly, the most natural thing to discuss is the type of movie this is. Put simply, this movie is much less so an actual coherent film, and more so a combination of stories put together through Alice and the plot device of her exploring Wonderland. As such, this film is difficult to review, being not about a particular story, but being an experience of the wacky things the film has to offer. My ultimate point here is that, upon finishing the film, I realized the difficult position I had put myself in, as the only real way to talk about it is through mentioning your favorite parts and telling others whether or not someone else ought to check it out and experience it for themselves. That being said, this will still play out like any other review of mine, or at least as close to it as possible. However, it will be a somewhat difficult task, as it will function much like the film in a way, as it's really going to be all over the place. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's start with arguably the most important thing in such a type of film, the world building, or in the case of Alice in Wonderland, the lack thereof. The whole point of Wonderland is that things don't make sense, and that everything that isn't is, and everything that is isn't, as Alice explains in the beginning. World building usually consists of two things, creativity and consistency. Alice in Wonderland, however, pours its world building into creativity and blasts consistency into the void. Luckily, this very much works in its favor, as Wonderland is easily one of the most innovative and absurd in the best way worlds that I've seen. It reminds me of the absurdity in the pink elephant scene from Dumbo, and what I imagine the randomness of Fantasia is like. I haven't seen it yet, but it's coming. The world is not only absurd in its nonsensical environments and main cast, but also in its inhabitants. The random woodland creatures that randomly show up are great. The first one that comes to mind are the birds whose stomach are bird cages, with more birds inside, and the dog with a broom on his tail that sweeps away the path Alice was trying to follow. On top of that, the colors are very vibrant and, well, colorful. Bottom line, the film's creativity is really well done, and while this contributes to its uniqueness in Disney's catalog, and possibly a reason for the movie's initial flop at the box office, it makes for a really fun time that leaves me feeling pretty happy, even if I look back at it with not much clue as to what I just saw. Well, while on the topic of creativity, let's discuss what will likely make up the majority of the conversation, the main cast of characters. Firstly, the White Rabbit. He doesn't really have much character in the film because he's the person who Alice is constantly chasing after, but we do get to see his house, and that's a pretty fun part. Plus, the twist that the thing he was late for was his job working for the Queen of Hearts is fun. Tweedledee and Tweedledum are kind of fun, though they do derail the story a bit by telling a horrifying story about a walrus and a carpenter who trick a bunch of baby oysters into following them so that they can eat them. But at the same time, it's kind of hilarious how randomly dark the story gets. But the twins themselves don't have much to discuss. The caterpillar is fun, with him being all condescending to Alice, but making no sense the entire time. The Cheshire Cat is easily the best of the characters. He's my favorite, he's everyone whose review I've seen's favorite, and more likely than not, he's your favorite too. His wacky nature combined with his floating and disappearing abilities make for a fun reoccurring character for Alice to try and decipher. The tea party featuring the Mad Hatter, the March Hare, and the Dormouse is also a highlight. The Dormouse rarely shows up, but the Mad Hatter and the March Hare are really funny characters. Finally, the Queen of Hearts makes for a very fun villain, despite only appearing in the final act. Her immediate reaction to everything always being to decapitate someone is hilariously dark for a Disney movie, and her overall character just being a raging person in position of power makes for a very entertaining and somewhat anxiety-inducing character to watch. Overall, this is a pretty great cast of characters, with pretty much all of them being pretty great and unique. There are various others who you could potentially count as part of the main cast, but I just picked the ones that made the most sense to me. Alice's trial is also really fun to watch, as the characters we've met over the course of the film come to give their testimonies and just be all around unhelpful to anyone. Finally, I'd like to discuss the music in the film. From what I could find, there were 30 songs written for the film, with most of them being used, though some for only a few seconds. Instead of trying to rank the songs per usual, I'm instead just going to list a few that I found particularly neat. This way, I avoid having to try and rank 30 songs, and it also works out better this way because most of the songs, to me anyways, aren't necessarily meant to be listened to outside of the film, and more so exist to deliver a certain tone to the wackiness of Wonderland. With that being said, however, there are still a few that stood out to me. Firstly, the song Painting the Roses Red, sung by the three of the Queen of Hearts playing cards, who bought white roses instead of red ones, and are now trying to cover up their mistake by painting the roses red to avoid them losing their heads. The song has great rhyming to it, and it is not unnecessarily catchy. Next, the song A Very Merry Unbirthday, sung by the Mad Hatter and the March Hare. They sing it as they celebrate their unbirthdays, which is to say a day on which they were not born, and upon discovering that it is also Alice's unbirthday, they sing the song. Mostly I love how the song returns at the trial where Mad Hatter discovers that it's the Queen's unbirthday and interrupts the entire trial to celebrate, much to the Queen's delight, though the song itself is also quite short, but catchy nonetheless. Finally, the opening and closing credits songs, which I suppose is called Alice in Wonderland, is a very mystical and spooky way to start and end the film, though also somewhat magical and mystical at the same time. A very eerie yet special feeling song that evokes a really great sense of Wonderland. Not particularly catchy, but a great tone setter. Overall, the songs are really great on the whole. Mostly tone setters, which results in not a whole lot to discuss, but still really fun. The only crime is that the Cheshire Cat didn't get a catchy song, which I feel like would have been amazing, but nonetheless a fun listen. I give Alice in Wonderland an 8 out of 10 for being a very unique film that rarely ever functions like a film, but nonetheless provides a fun time that leaves me feeling delighted looking back at it all. I was originally planning to give it a 7 out of 10, but after writing this script late at night in the midst of busy day after busy day, I received a very surreal sense of whimsy from Wonderland that must be given some extra credit. Alice in Wonderland is a very fun film that I recommend trying at least once. It's not the type of film that you can just turn on any old night. There definitely has to be a certain tone in the air, a certain late night, extra special day type of feel for the most enjoyment. As cheesy as it sounds to say, Alice in Wonderland is really more of an experience than a film, and while that makes it difficult and somewhat unfair to the film to analyze and discuss, it does make for a great time. Before we completely finish, I want to quickly update everyone on my reviews of every Walt Disney Animation Studios film. While I do still plan on reviewing most of these films, and in alphabetical order, I am going to eliminate Saludos Amigos, The Three Caballeros, Make Mine Music, Fun and Fancy Free, and Melody Time. I'm eliminating these 5 because they were made during a time in which Disney couldn't afford to make one coherent story, and instead made these package films, which are essentially a collection of unrelated shorts. That's not to say that I might not review them somewhere down the line, but for this particular series, I'm going to choose to opt out. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to share any opinions you had on the movie. A new episode releases each week, so stay tuned to see which film I cover next. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.